In this video, I'm going to share an automation with you that is worth thousands of dollars to thousands of businesses out there. And that is because there are so many people out there and their only job is to take a piece of paper where there are information written on it and take that information and write it into a database or write it into a form manually. And this could be a piece of paper that is handwritten, it could be a paper that is printed out, or it could be a PDF. Regardless, this is a job that so many people out there are doing, and it is a very tedious job, and it can be automated away quite easily with what we're going to build in this video. Okay, so let's get started and look at a practical demo, and then we're going to build it out. So the first thing that we're going to need is a form where we upload a file. Okay, so I'm using Airtable and I'm going to show you why in a bit. It's a very powerful tool in order to create forms, but also in order to create databases with automations and so forth. If you follow me on YouTube or subscribe to me on YouTube, you will see many cases where I use it and why I use it. So let's add an attachment here. So I'm just going to put this form here, and you can see I have the form in multiple different formats. So it's the same type of form, right? Same kind of information is stored and even handwritten entirely. So all of those can work or will work with this automation. So let me upload this file and let me make sure that I'm running my make automation. So I'm going to wait for new data. This is my make automation that we're going to use for this. And now let me submit the image. So then this will be triggered, this webhook. So this whole automation will run through. And by the way, if you are totally overwhelmed with what you see here, I would recommend that you check out my AI automation masterclass. You will find the link in the description below. It's inside of my school community, and there you will learn everything that you need to know about Airtable as well as about Make in order to build out amazing automations such as this one. And yeah, this is just V1 of the form data. I also have a V2, which is even crazier and better. But this one is already good for what we're going to do, okay? So we now can see that the automation went through. Let's look at our database, and we have this new entry that was just created where it got the information from this file where we have the customer name. No, it was not this one, it was this one. Rajesh, the address, the number, the date, and so forth. And all of this information is now here. So the address, then the number, as well as the date, all extracted beautifully from this form directly into a database. No human effort required except for uploading the file. But even that could be automated. So if it is a file that is received via email, the email could then be directly triggering the event so that the automation would run from there and no human interaction would be required there. So that's, however, what we're going to build. So let's try it again with another image, this time with the fully handwritten one, and see if this is going to work as well. So let's drop it in there, the attachment. And also let's make sure my automation is running, wait for new data, and I'm going to submit that. So the automation is also turned on permanently, but I want to also be able to click into the individual items and see what it did. That's why I'm running it this way. Now, obviously I could also go to the history, but this is fine for me because I really like seeing how it works it out. So you will see here in my table, well, yeah, it did create a new entry here with John and all the good stuff. So look at this file. It says name is John, address is R1S K4, the number is 1924, and so forth. So all of this information is extracted from this file and it's stored in the database and can now be used for whatever purposes. And I already know of a few business cases where this tool itself would be worth tens of thousands of dollars, okay? Now, just consider somebody sitting there, and in the US, the minimum wage, I think, is like 14 or so, or $15. So somebody sitting there for $15, and the only thing that they do is enter this information into a database. So from a business perspective, having a tool like this is very valuable. Now, obviously, we'll need to find new jobs for people who have been doing only that. So that's definitely a drawback of AI automation, and I am aware of that. So let's make the best out of it. Then, how can we build all of this out? Well, let's build it out from scratch, okay? So let's start with the database that we need to build. Then we will need to build a form. Then we will need to go and create this automation. And the most complicated part will be this part here. but let's build it step by step. The first thing that you will need is going to be an Airtable account. So if you want to follow step by step, you will need Airtable for that. And you will need to have the paid tier because the free tier is lacking one particular feature that we are using, and that is the automated running of the, the automation once a form is created. You can, however, do a workaround where you would trigger the automation automatically based on time passed, so every 15 minutes or every hour or something like that. Then you would need the paid version. I'm going to show you when that is, and if you want to know how to get your way around it, you will also learn that in my AI automation masterclass in my school. So now let's go ahead and create a new table inside of the workspace. That is the paid one that we have if you are using the paid variant. So we're gonna start from scratch. Now, obviously you could have used the AI tool and taken a screenshot of my video and then say, hey, put all of these columns in there. But I want to show you how the actual flow would work. So let's get rid of these columns here that we're not gonna use. So these fields. And the one that we are interested in is, first of all, this base. So let's change the base name, and I'm going to call this one my image to DB base, and the table is just going to be, let's say, form entries, something like that. So what is the information that I want to store? Well, first of all, in here, I want to store the record ID. In order to achieve that, I'm just going to use a formula here. And as I said, if this is overwhelming, you should definitely check out my course. Otherwise, this will be a little bit difficult. So let's use this record ID, and I need to write it correctly, obviously. So it's a record underscore ID. If it turns green, then it will work. So now each individual row inside of your table has its own unique ID, and this is the record ID that I get here. So let's get rid of those here, and let's build out the columns. So the columns will be the, well, first of all, I will need one that is called type. And why do I need that? Well, the thing is, I want to have two different types. One will be training data, and I will show you why that is valuable. And the other one will be, let's just call it data. So we have training and data. You can obviously give it better names if you want to. So now let's say we want to create the training data first, and then we want to, well, all others to be just data type. So then the next column that we're going to need is going to be the training record ID. And this training record ID will also be a formula. There we are. And this one, well, there the formula will be, actually, in my case, it's going to be this particular ID. So I'm going to create this field with just empty data, and I'm going to use this data here. Let me just copy this. So control copy, and then I'm going to put that ID in here. So then the next thing will be the attachment. So the actual image that is added. So attachment, that will be the actual form or whatever document you want to use there. So this will be an attachment. This is this one here. Then the next parts all depend on the individual item or the individual form that you are looking at. So if we look at this form here, you see we have a customer name, an address, a number, a date, a job card number, a vehicle number, and a key number. Okay, so we will need all of these columns. And if you have a different form which has different items that you want to read, then you would create different columns here. So I'm just going to use exactly the ones that you just saw. So customer name, then the address, then I'm going to have a number, and I'm going to keep it simple and all of them just be single line texts. That's going to make my life easier. Then I'm going to use a date, and here I'm not going to use the date type or whatever. I'm also just using the single line text. Again, to make my life easier, because I'm extracting the data from a JSON object later on. So that will make it a lot easier if I do it this way. Then the job card number, as well as the vehicle number. Then we had finally, I believe, the key number. All right. So with that, we have all the columns that I have in here. So again, this would be unique to you. The next thing is going to be to fill out the training data with one particular one of those images that I have. Okay. So let's say I'm using this one to use it as training data. So this should be the item that trains my model to understand what output I want to have. And this will be very useful because it will reduce the amount of errors that you're going to get by a big margin. So it's going to reduce it drastically. Okay, so I will need to enter all this information for this particular image. So I'm just going to drag the attachment in there as the attachment, and I'm just going to enter the data manually. Okay, so let me just see if I have this image. I believe I do. It's this Rajesh guy. Okay, so customer name was Rajesh. The address was this here. Then the number, let me just check. Yeah, it is. Okay, so then the date was this here. And I know this is a little tedious and boring, but this is something you set up once and you save yourself or your business many, many hours. Okay, so there we are. So this is going to be our training data. And I want to use that training data in my automation. Okay, so before we set up the form, let's actually set up our make. Okay, so this is what we want to have in the end. And now let's actually create a new scenario. So here I'm going to use a webhook. I'm going to use a custom webhook, and I'm going to call this custom webhook something like form submitted webhook. All right, let's save that. Let's copy this address, which will be this address right here. So I'm going to also rename the automation up here. I'm going to call this one image to database, for example. Now you could call it whatever. I'm going to save it so that this automation isn't going to be empty. And now let's go back to our image to DB. And here let's go to automations. And this is where the part comes in where you actually need to have the paid variant if you want to make it, well, to do it as I do, so with a webhook. Otherwise, you would have to not use an instant trigger, but you would actually have to use something that is a different type of trigger where it is just running this automation every hour or whatever. Okay, so in my case, however, I am using this automation the way that I just showed you, and this makes it so much easier. So we can say whenever a form is submitted, then this trigger should be executed, and I'm gonna run a script when that happens. And the code that I want to use is going to be this code right here. Okay, so let me just put that into a separate line so it's easier to read. So I'm basically saying I get the input from this input config, and I can add input variables here. So one of the input variables that I want to add is going to be my webhook URL. So I'm going to call it webhook URL. And the value that I'm going to assign is going to be this particular value. So I'm going to copy, or click on this copy to clipboard, and I'm going to paste the value in here. Okay, so this will add this variable here, this webhook variable. So this parameter that I'm reading from my params. Okay, so then I will need another input field, and then another input field will be the record ID. So let's call it record ID, written exactly like it's here. You see now the red underlining is gone, and the record ID I actually get from when form is submitted, and currently I don't get any details on that. So we will need to check that out in a second again. So then another field that I want to have is going to be the base ID. So I'm going to create a base ID, and the base ID I actually get, so let me click on finish editing, I get from here. So when you click in here, this here is your base ID, and this here is the table ID. So if you have multiple different tables, so let's say I am creating a new table here, table 2, you see this thing changed, the second part, but the first one is the same. So let me jump over here. You see it's still the same. So it's still APPPOLY, but this second one is TBLU, and here it's TBLWNU. Okay, so it's a different ID. So I'm interested in this form entries base ID, which is the ID of the base, so image 2DB base. So this is my database. So I'm interested in that, which means, let me actually go into automations here. Let me keep going with my automation. And I cannot use the record ID because I didn't set up when the form is submitted. So we don't have a form yet. So we will need to set up a form, then we can finish this automation. However, I want to add the base ID in here. And while I'm at it, let's also add the table ID. Okay, so this one here, table ID, which is going to be this APPO in my case. This will be different for you. So all of these values here will be different. Only the names will be the same. So now I can't use this value here. How can we fix that? Well, by creating a form. So let's go ahead and create a form here. So I'm going to say new form, and my new form will be actually very simple. So I'm just going to call this one image to DB form. Okay. And here, let's create the form and let's actually get rid of all the columns that we don't need. And we don't need any of the columns except for the attachment. So I'm going to remove all of them. So remove this one, click into it, remove this one, click into that one, remove it as well. Because all of this information, I don't want to enter manually. I just want to drop the image and let the automation do the entry of those fields. All right. So now we can obviously add a nice little description here. So we could say, let me just use the description from here. So transforming paper forms into digital efficiency. Form Genie is an intelligent automation solution designed to streamline the extraction, generation, and management of form data. So you get the point. So let's publish this form, click on done, and then we will see what the form will look like. So you can share it with anyone on the web, copy the link and share it with people. But then everyone who has the link can upload images here, and this will eat up your automations inside of Airtable. So be aware of that, and also of Make, depending on if you have connected it or not. So now that we have that, let's go and edit, well, actually view data. Let's go to automation specifically here. Now that we have this, when the form is submitted, we can select which one we want to use. So we want to use form entries and select our image to DB form that we just created. So once we have that, then we can go to run script and select a record ID, which we will get from here. So we can select this Airtable record ID. Okay. So now if we look at this edit code again, so here's the little bit of code that we have. You don't need to understand it in depth. It's really basically just running a little bit of code that will pass information about the record ID, the base ID, and the table ID to our webhook. So this webhook needs to know who called it. So who clicked me, so to speak. And we're passing on all the information. So we're passing on the, this part here. So this part here specifically, then this part here, and then finally this part here. So this is the record ID, this is the table ID, and well, this here is the table ID, and this is the base ID. So we're passing all these information in there. This will make your life a lot easier down the line. So then that we have that, we can go ahead and do something with this webhook. Well, let's first of all run it. Let's run it once and see if it actually works. So we have built our automation. Let's turn this automation on. We can actually test it from here. So we can test the automation with a record, and we already have a record. So let's select the record that we created in our database. This is this one record where we have Rajesh, which is our training data. So let's run this once from here, select a record, select this, click into it, and then click on run automation. So this should call this webhook, and we should be able to read what it gave us. So it gave us the record ID, the base ID, and the table ID. Oh, it seems like I did make a mistake with my table ID. Good to see it. So as we saw, form entries is this one here, this is the base ID, and this is the table ID. So I will need to go back into my automations to make sure that, well, I can click out of this test and make sure that I am passing the right table ID. I didn't do that before. So once I did that, I'm going to update, I'm going to change this automation, and now it should pass on the right table ID. Let me test this action, and let's actually run this automation once again, and I'm going to use existing data. And this time you see I get a record ID, a base ID, and a table ID, and all of them are different. So here, this is the record ID that I'm passing. We can see that EFIN. Is it EFIN? Yes, it is. So the record ID is now there. We can now use this piece of information to read out all of this other stuff. And here we will need to add an Airtable module, because I will use the information that I get from webhook to then load out this information. So I'm going to use Airtable here, get a record, and then I will need to add a connection, select Airtable OAuth. I'm going to give it a connection name here. I'm going to call it my image to DB Airtable connection. And then this pop-up will appear where I will have to select the base that I want to use. So image to DB, I'm going to grant access to that. All right, then we can select the base, which I'm going to map. So I'm going to map the base, the table, and the record ID, which I get from my webhook. So I'm going to say the base ID is this, the table ID is the table ID, and the record ID is the record ID. And by doing so, I should now get the information loaded in here. So let me run this once and let me test this action inside of ImageDB with our form. And then you will see that you get this information here. So this was the input, the record ID, base ID, table ID, and the output was, well, all of this information. So we get the key number, the address, the customer name, and so forth. All the good stuff. Perfect. So now what we can do is we can use this information. So one of them here is going to get the form record, and the other one is going to get the training data that I want to use in order to make sure that my ChatGPT module is going to do a better job. Okay, so here I'm going to add another Airtable, and I'm going to get a record as well. And I'm going to use the same connection. I'm going to use the base that I get from my webhook, base ID, the table ID that I get from there, and the record ID, that's what I get from this training record ID from my Airtable block. All right, so this will allow me to load this line, because this line was my training data. I manually entered it, right? So I, as a human, did the training, and now with my experience, I train the ChatGPT module that comes next. So here I'm going to use OpenAI ChatGPT, create a completion, and here you will need to add a connection to your OpenAI account. So OpenAI key. So you will need to go to OpenAI, sign up, set up your credit card, and then enter a little bit like $10 or something like that, so that you can then get an API key. So I have set that up before, so I'm going to use my API key. And here I want to create a chat completion with the model GPT-4o latest. And what I will need to enter here is going to be quite a bit. So I will have different kind of levels of settings. So one message will be the developer/system message, and I'm going to share that with you or show that to you here. So this system message will allow me to then in the end get better results. So it says this GPT is designed to extract and process fields from images of paper forms. It accepts images of forms and analyzes their structure to identify fields such as headings, text boxes, and so forth. Okay, then you have this little bit of information. By the way, you can pause the video every single time, take a screenshot and put it in there, or you can join my school and then you can just get the template and they will have all this filled out for you. Okay, so here the output format should be JSON. And then finally, I'm just telling it some additional information. So then I need to add more messages here. And I will explain in a bit what's going on here. So the messages are going to be the actual training data. So here I'm using user and I'm saying extract the following details from the given form. So I'm giving it the form and I want to load all these details. And where do we have these details from? Well, these are our column names / these are the names of the form items here. So customer name, address, number, date, and so forth. And I want to have all of that. That's why I tell it that in the user role. And then for this, I'm going to add an image type or an image input type, which is going to be URL. And I get it from my attachment, this one here. So this Airtable is 5, I will get it from 6, okay? I get this attachment, and specifically not the attachment itself, but the URL. So I don't want to share the actual image, I want to share where the image is, so the URL. So then I can add another message here, and this time it will be the assistant. This assistant is basically just going to be this JSON code here, okay? So I'm saying, give me JSON code as output, where I get the customer name and the type is short text input. And the value was, for example, well, for our training data, it was a little different. So I was using Rajesh here. So let me make sure that it's Rajesh or Rajesh. Then this one was R1 and so forth. So I did use a different image for my particular case. So here I'm using the number, the date. So this information has to fit. So what you're entering here has to fit, first of all, the type that you used here. So this is a single line text, which technically can be interpreted as short text input. Then we have the name of the column, which is date. And then we have the value, which I extracted manually from this image here, from this attachment, right? So it has to be exactly this data. Otherwise, I'm teaching the wrong information and ChatGPT could be confused. So let me just make sure that I enter the right information here. And you would have to do that manually as well, all right? I know it might be a little boring to do all of these things, but you have to do it once and then it's gonna work. So that's the great part here. So then we have the key number finally, all right? And with that, we gave it how we want the output to look like. So it should be JSON, because we can then use JSON in order to then extract the information and store it inside of a database object. Then I'm gonna have the user role where the text content is being, again, extract the following fields and extract it from a URL. And the image URL is this URL that is at the attachment level. And that should be it. Wait a second. Just need to make sure it's not this one. It's not from 6. This time it's actually from 5. Okay, so this is very important. This is quite tricky right now, but we have 2 different fields. One is two different Airtable get a record fields. This one here gets the normal record, and this one here, or this one gets the form record, and this one gets the training record, the training data, okay? So what we want to achieve is that inside of this OpenAI module, as the training data, we are passing the training image. As the data that we want to actually extract information from, we are passing the new image. So this one from Airtable, in my case, the left one, this 5, this is the one that I'm using as the final message, as the user message. So before that, I gave it a user message that I also attached to training data, but also the training output. Now I'm just giving it the user input without the training output. And now in order to understand that better, I created a quick presentation. So let's go over that so that this makes more sense. But I'm gonna save this now. And before we go into the presentation, let's actually just run it once with a new form data. So I'm gonna say run once. I'm going to go to forms and I'm going to run this one time, but this time with the manually written data. So let's upload this file and let's submit. This should trigger this automation. There we are, it triggered it. It got the data. Now it's going to extract the data from an image and it got the result. And there we are, the result, the output here is in JSON format. We have the customer name, John. We have the address RS1K, so let's compare that. So we have customer name John. We have the address, which is R1S.K-4, the name, name number, which is the short text input 1924. We have the date, which is correct, and so forth. So now we get all the right details, and we just need to store it in the right format. But before we go there, let me explain what happened inside of this ChatGPT module so it makes a little more sense. So this is the part where I'm showing you how to train a ChatGPT module in make.com, and this is what we just did, but now let's actually look at how this really works and what is happening. So what we're doing is we are using the system message, which acts as a foundational instruction for ChatGPT, setting the tone, the rules, and behavior for the entire conversation. So it provides the context and defines the module's purpose, ensuring it stays focused on the task. So for example, it might instruct the GPT model to extract specific fields from a form and return data in a structured JSON format, like we saw. And this message helps guide the model consistently, minimizing ambiguity in its responses, which is pretty important, right? So then we are using user messages. So the user messages represent the input or query provided to ChatGPT. So it outlines a specific task or question that the model needs to address. So this message is essentially for guiding GPT to understand what is expected in a given instance. For instance, a user message might ask the model to extract fields like customer name and address from a form, serving as a clear and actionable request. So what is the assistant message? Well, the assistant message is the response generated by ChatGPT based on the instructions provided in the system message and the query in the user message. So it demonstrates how the model interprets the task and provides the output. For example, an assistant message might return the extracted fields in JSON format, ensuring the output aligns with the defined structure and task requirements. So this message then showcases the model's capability to understand and deliver the results consistently. So now let's go ahead and actually use that. So let's go back here and let's check it out. So what we want to do is we want to now take the data that we just extracted from this file and we want to fill it out for all of these fields. So therefore, let's go back to our automation. And what we will need here is we will need to make sure that we are getting the data in the right format. So this data here is, well, it's just this JSON text. Well, it's not really JSON, it's just text, but we need to have it in JSON format. And JSON format, you can see here, is given to us as one big block with individual list items. So we have one item, which is this item with the name customer name. This is of the type short type or short text input, and then the value is John. Then we have another entry here, which is the address with the short text input type and the value of rs or r1 as dot empty space k minus 4. So this is what we get as output, but I want to reduce all of this stuff. So this back apostrophe and so forth dot JSON or JSON, we want to get rid of that. And in order to do that, we can use something called a text parser. So here I'm going to use this text parser, specifically the one where it says match pattern advanced. So here, what I want to do here is I want to make sure that it globally matches, that it is not case sensitive, it is multi-line, and the pattern is actually quite simple. So I'm just saying get rid of the JSON at the start with these back apostrophes or apostrophes, and at the end, get rid of these two. And then as the text, I want to use the result. So this is the input that I get, which is the result from this OpenAI module. And then at this point, I can just run this module only with the result. So I'm just going to, well, you can copy it from the iteration from ChatGPT and extract that. And then we can use that to create a JSON. So you can just search for JSON and then you will find this JSON module. And I want to parse JSON. All right. So I want to parse the JSON string that I get from this one here. So let me just unlink this so I can actually use it. Let me also save my automation at this point and let's run it once. And this transformer should not be the last item, so I cannot run it without making it work. So let me just delete this module again. Let me add an Airtable here, and I'm just going to say update records, and therefore I will need to add a connection. Here you will need to add a connection, so just use the one that you created before and click on OK. And here you can then just select the image to DB table, grant access here. And this should allow you to access the database. And this is updating. So there is a difference between retrieving and reading data and actually changing data. And here I'm going to use my image to DB base and the table. So form entries. And as the record ID, I'm just going to get the record ID from the webhook at the start. Okay. So this Airtable, I say it should update a record. Currently, it's not going to update anything, which is okay. But I will need this anyways later. I just want to run this automation as it is before going on to the next step. So let me actually go to automations here. Let me make sure to test this action once again with a form. So we will need to go to this form entries and select a form. For some reason, my form doesn't appear here. So let me see what is going on there. Where it went, well, there it is. It's still there. Let's click on done just to be sure. Let's click on fix configuration. And you know what? I am going to do it another way. I'm annoyed by this form submission. I'm just going to say whenever a record is created, then, well, inside of this form entries, I'm going to update my automation. Let me see if everything is still fine here. And let me run it like this. So I'm going to select this new record that I created and I'm going to run the automation. So I changed it to when a record is created. So the thing is, it is technically going to result in the same thing because when a record is created is also happening the moment that a form is submitted. So when you submit a form, a new entry, a new row, a new record is created in your data or in your table. All right, so this thing will be created whenever a new form is entered, okay, or submitted. So I'm just saying, hey, whenever a new entry is created, also run this automation or just run the automation. So we ran the test. Let me see if it worked, and we saw, yeah, it worked. So we now get this as an input, this part here, and this here as an output. So you see, it doesn't have this JSON dash 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 at the start and neither at the end. So that's great. So now what we can do is we can unlink this module here. I'm going to use that later. What we're going to use is JSON here, and I want to parse JSON. So the JSON string that I want to use is going to be value. So whatever is the output of this text parser. And then I want to use tools here. So search for tools. And the one that I want to use is this set variable. So the set variable is going to be name that I get from my JSON here, from this one. Seems like I will need to run it first. So run this module only with the value that I get from here. So this one, let's paste it in there. Let's run it with this value only. And you see, I get this JSON string as an input, and as an output, I get a bunch of bundles. So it parsed the JSON and basically created individual objects out of it. So now I can use this in my next next step here, where I said tools set variable. And here I'm just going to say the name should be the variable name and the value should be the variable value. Okay, and the next thing that I will need to do is an array aggregator. So I'm going to use this array aggregator here, and the source module for this array aggregator should be our parse JSON. So the parse JSON, which is 13 in my case, this one, right? And the information that I'm going to get to aggregate here is customer name. Let's select that. Let's move this Airtable a little bit away. And you see now it creates this gray background, which means that only those three modules will be repeated as to however many bundles this parse JSON will create. So you see it creates 7 bundles. That's because we have 7 different columns that we are extracting from an image. So if you are extracting more information from a form, this would be running multiple times. But in my case, I'm just setting the variable accordingly with this array aggregator. And now I can get multiple, and does it work like this? Yeah, in tools, I get multiple variables. And the ones that I want to get, well, we need to add them manually. I will need to get the customer name. I will need to get the address, the number. And this is something that I enter here based on the form, right? Based on this form, for example, here. So customer name, address, number, date, job number, job card number, vehicle number, and key number. All right, so I will need to create all of these variable names here. So we had number, we have date, we have the job card number, then the vehicle number, and finally the key number. All right, so now we can finally update the records based on whatever we get out of tools. Okay, so let's run this once again and let's wait for new data. Let's trigger a new test. So select a record, and I'm not going to use the training data, but the actual normal data. And let's run this automation and let's see how this will run. So you see here, ChatGPT is doing the heavy lifting, but then after that, we're extracting it into the right format, breaking it down. And you see here, this set variables was run 7 times. So for every single bundle that we got as output, it was run once, but then all these operations here are put together through this array aggregator. So all of these were input bundles, and in the end, it just gave me one output bundle with one array that contains all the relevant information that then is mapped. Okay, and now we're taking this mapped information and automatically mapping it into this one tools where it gets multiple variables, all of these, and then it puts them together into one beautiful bundle output. So it gets all of these variables now from this array aggregator, and then it just puts it together into this beautiful thing here, which we then can take as information, as input into our Airtable, which updates our database. And this is the actual thing that we wanted to achieve all along, right? So now we can go ahead and just enter all the individual details. So let's do that. So the first thing is the type is data, and let me actually select map here. So it should be type data. So I'm updating if we look at our data here, yeah, I'm updating this type here to be data type because this is not training data. This was actual data that we extracted from a new file. However, you could upload as much training data as you want. This will make your tool a lot better. You saw how the training data works, or how training a ChatGPT module works when we added this part here. So if you had multiple lines of multiple rows inside of your Airtable that you want to use as training data, you would put them in here every single time as a user message as well as a assistant message with the manually entered information for that new training data. Okay, but let's actually fill out our Airtable record here. So the customer name we get from our tools, customer name. The address we get from address. The number from number, the date from date, the job card number from here, the vehicle number. There is no vehicle number, or I didn't find any, and the key number like so. Okay, so let's now, and now before we run it, I noticed a little error that I had in my tool setup, and I have to be very careful with how I call things. So it's called vehicle like this. So vehicle instead of vehicle, SCAL, how I wrote it before. So now at this point, let's save our automation and let's run it once, wait for new data, and let's start our test with the selected record. So with the one that we created earlier, where we ran the form once. So now let's run this automation, and this should run through flawlessly. So let's see if we get all the info filled out. So let's see here, and we get all the info in here as the bundle output, and it should then store it all inside of our Airtable. And here, oh yeah, I missed something. I didn't change this one here to vehicle number. All right, now let me run it again because I'm going to wait for new data. I'm gonna run the test once again because I had this little typo in there. And at this point, it should update our Airtable accordingly with all the columns. Okay, so there we are. So we got the vehicle number in there as well. That's great. Let's go over to our table, and we see our vehicle number has been added. Our job card is there, the key number, date, everything is there. So now we extracted all the information and put it in there. So that's definitely cool, right? So at this point, let's run the automation with the automation turned on. So let's click on immediately as data is, as data arrived. I'm gonna say delete all data, and there we are. So now let me just make sure that when I go out and I go back in, that it is still turned on. Okay, because I ran into a problem earlier where it just didn't do that. So I'm checking that now every time. So let's go ahead and use our form to actually send in the other image. So we have had this, we didn't use this image yet, where we don't have a key number, okay? So let's just drag this image in here. This is just a separate form. Let's submit, and this should trigger this automation. It is turned on, right? So we will see that it should run here. We see 4:31 p.m. It's in progress. So it created a new entry in my table, this one right here, which then should trigger this automation, and we can go to history and see that the automation is in fact running. We can jump into the details if we want to follow along, and we will see that it currently is at the ChatGPT block, and then it should run through the rest flawlessly, hopefully. So webhook, advanced, getting the record. Let me see, it says succeeded. Well, there is still this little block that makes me a little scared, but let's look at the automation, and we actually see that it was filled out. So we have Meena Patil, Mysore, the address, and all the good stuff. So let me check if this is actually what we have here. So we have address Mysore, whatever that is, with the number 352, the date is correct, the job card number, and so forth. Okay, and the key number is empty because we didn't have any there. But with that, our automation works. So now imagine you had something more complicated, for example, like this form, where you also have different columns, okay? So let's say you have fields with individual columns and stuff like that, right? So that would make it a little more complicated, and you would have to read out all of these individually as well and store them as well. So if you have that problem, then you should definitely check out my version 2 of this automation. So I'm going to show you that in a second. So the version 2, the difference there is that it allows you to load even particulars or specific information from columns, and this is what it looks like. So it is a little more complicated. There are a few more things going. You use your routers and all the good stuff. With what you've learned in this video, you should be able to build it, but it will be quite tough. So I would recommend that you join my school, and there you get the templates that you can just paste it in and work with it a lot faster. And also you get access to my AI automation masterclass, to other amazing templates. You get access to this community, can talk to people, can talk to me. We're jumping on calls also, and all the good stuff. So don't miss the chance. Join the AI automation specialists. You can find the link in the description below. And if you made it this far in the video, also don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and add a comment what you think about this automation and what you want to use this for. So thanks a lot, and see you in the next video.